for more than a decade. Drake's name wasn't just on the charts. It was welded to them, unshakable, untouchable. Until now, what started as a night of pure art in Atlanta has turned into a pressure wave so strong it's bending the industry. Kendrick Lamar and SZA didn't fire shots. They didn't leak subs. They did something far more dangerous. They shifted the center of gravity suddenly. The world isn't orbiting around Toronto's golden boy anymore. It's spinning around a new axis, forged in real-time collaboration, raw energy, and zero marketing. And in the middle of it all, cracks are forming. Not because Drake lost, but because the ground under him is moving. This isn't beef, it's physics. And if you care about hip-hop, you're watching history tilt. #Kendrick, #SZA, #Drake, #Drake, #Shockwave era. At Kendrick Lamar, at Shaw, at Champagne PAP, Atlanta has always had a pulse. But on this night, it felt like the whole city had a heartbeat. You could see. The streets outside the arena were a swarm of jerseys, hoodies, flashbulbs, and barely contained electricity. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. That was the point. Tickets had sold out in minutes with almost no marketing. No massive label campaign, no cryptic billboard drops. It was a whisper that turned into a rumor, then into a surge. Kendrick's in town, SZA flying in. Something's happening. When doors opened, the air inside felt heavier than usual. People weren't just waiting for music. They were waiting for a moment, even if they couldn't name it. Some fans were grinning like they'd won the lottery. Others stood quiet, soaking it in like they knew they were standing at the edge of a story they'd tell years later. Then, without countdown or light show theatrics, the stage went dark. A single piano chord floated out of the speakers raw, unpolished, almost like a rehearsal that had leaked into reality. A beat kicked in. The lights snapped to white. And there they were, Kendrick Lamar and SZA. No intro, no hype man, no delay. Just presence. The kind that silences an arena in a heartbeat. They didn't open with hits. They opened with a track nobody recognized. It wasn't on any streaming service. It wasn't a leak. It was new, alive, and dangerous. People started looking at each other like, are we hearing this first? Are we supposed to be recording this? Phones shot up anyway. Thousands of glowing rectangles capturing history mid-breath. By the third verse, the lyrics started hitting like coded messages. Not disses, but declarations. Lines about taking back the soul of a genre. About building without permission. About remembering when rap wasn't an industry. It was a heartbeat in the dark. SZA's voice cut through like glass in a velvet room. Kendrick floated between cadences like a man testing weapons he'd hidden for years. And the crowd. It went from screaming to silent to screaming again. Not hype, but stunned recognition. Somewhere between tracks, the shift began. You could feel it, even in the cheap seats. It's a sense that you weren't just watching a performance. You were watching a pivot point. A cultural axis being quietly unscrewed and reset. People started whispering names, almost like invoking ghosts. This feels like Watch the Throne. This feels like when Outkast broke radio. This feels like the night everything changed. Then, inevitably, someone said it. Where's Drake? Not out loud, not in anger, but in curiosity. Because for the past decade, Drake wasn't just part of the scene. He was the scene. Every rollout, every collab, every move orbiting around the gravitational pull of OVO. But in that arena, for the first time in years, the gravitational pull was somewhere else. No one had taken shots at him. Nobody needed to. The silence around his name was louder than a diss track. It was the sound of the crowd's attention bending in a new direction without being told to. That's how empires crack. Not in explosions, but in vibrations, small, relentless shifts that make the walls hum before they split. The show kept escalating. Visuals behind them weren't branded or polished. They looked like art films spliced together by instinct. One track bled into the next without the usual "this is the single" cues. It felt like a jam session between titans who had decided for one night to stop caring about charts, formats, and expectations. The audience changed with it. You could see people forgetting to record, just staring with wide eyes like they were trying to memorize the air. Influencers put phones down. Industry people in VIP sections leaned forward, whispering fast, urgent things into each other's ears. By the time the encore hit, a stripped-down haunting duet that sounded like a prayer for the culture itself, the crowd wasn't cheering. They were roaring like something had been returned to them. Not nostalgia. Not a the old days were better vibe. Something alive. Something now. When the house lights finally came up, nobody wanted to leave. Groups stood in clusters, dissecting what they'd just seen, already drafting posts in their heads, already imagining how this night would ripple across the industry. Within minutes, the outside world knew. Clips hit Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere at once. And the language people used wasn't concert, collab, or surprise appearance. It was moment, movement, shift. And somewhere in Toronto, a phone buzzed. On a marble counter, a manager looked down at trending topics, saw 2 names climbing, saw 1 name missing, and felt the temperature in the room drop. No one had fired a shot. No one had called a name. But the map had redrawn itself while everyone was asleep. That's the night the ground shifted. The night an empire didn't fall. It tilted. And once gravity changes, everything built on top of it starts to slide. #Kendrick, #SZA number Drake, #Atlanta Shockwave, #Hip Hop History, @Kendrick Lamar, @Shaw, @Champagne PAPI, the morning after Atlanta. It wasn't just social media buzzing, it was everything. The clips were everywhere. Not just shaky vertical videos, but edited, multi-angle, color-corrected highlight reels that fans made overnight like they were covering a presidential debate. Not a concert. And each one had the same tone. Awe, disbelief, and that electric conspiratorial whisper. Did they just change the game? People didn't just watch, they rewatched. A 20-second clip of Kendrick ripping through a new verse got 1.2 million views in 6 hours. A slow-motion shot of SZA hitting a note that cracked the arena open like glass hit trending worldwide, and then the shift got louder. Playlists started changing. Not the curated ones, the personal ones. People started replacing Drake tracks with deep cuts from SZA, TRL, and Kendrick's, untitled, unmastered. Not out of hate, not even as a protest, out of instinct. Out of heat, because when something alive shows up, everything else starts too. Feel like yesterday in hip-hop, energy is currency. You can't fake it, you can't buy it. You can only earn it or lose it. And for the first time in a long time, Drake wasn't holding the highest denomination in the room. Within 48 hours, streaming charts started to twitch. Kendrick's back catalog climbed. SZA's entire discography doubled in daily plays. Features they'd done 5 years ago were suddenly trending like new releases. And the conversation online wasn't about beef. It was about alignment. This isn't a diss. One viral tweet said, "It's a reminder of who built the ceiling." They didn't destroy Drake. Another wrote, "They made him irrelevant without saying a word." That's what made it lethal. There was nothing to respond to. No bars to flip, no shade to deflect. It was art as gravity pulling the culture somewhere else whether you liked it or not. Podcasts lit up. YouTubers rushed to record breakdowns. Industry blogs started dropping think pieces with headlines like, "Is this the end of the algorithm era, and why last night's show matters more than chart numbers ever could?" Meanwhile, Drake's name hovered in the trending tabs like a ghost at its own funeral. Not in disgrace, not in scandal, but in absence. In the sense that, for the first time in a decade, he wasn't the center of the conversation. And that silence, it was deafening. The ripple wasn't just cultural, it was structural. Radio programmers called labels asking, should we pivot rotation? Playlist curators started slipping Lamar and SZA tracks into slots usually reserved for Drake releases. Not because of pressure, but because of demand. Brand managers started quietly emailing agencies. Any way to get Lamar on board before Q4. SZA2. And deep in label boardrooms, questions nobody dared ask out loud a month ago were now the only ones worth asking. Did we bet too hard on one name for too long? And if the center moves, how fast do we pivot before the old model eats us alive? Here's the wildest part. Kendrick and SZA weren't even talking about it. No tweets, no Instagram captions, no gloating. They just let the work speak. That's the part that burned. Being a culture addicted to rollout, to trolling, to stunts, to artists just walked into Atlanta, opened a vein on stage, and left. And the whole world couldn't stop bleeding from it. Drake's not done. Let's make that clear. The man is a strategist, a machine, a cultural juggernaut with reach. No one in hip-hop has ever fully matched. But power isn't always about who has the throne. Sometimes it's about where the crowd is looking. And right now, every set of eyes in the room is turned toward two names. Lamar and SZA. Not because they destroyed the king, but because they built something people didn't know they were starving for. And when the crowd starts to shift naturally, without hashtags, without campaigns, no empire, no matter how rich, can bribe gravity. This wasn't a beef. It was a reckoning. A quiet one, a clean one. The kind you can't fight, because fighting it only proves it's real. And in that silence, in that eerie calm after the blast, you could almost hear a question moving through the culture like a ghost in the rafters. If the center isn't where we thought it was, where is it now? And that, more than any diss track, is how you feel a dynasty start to tremble. #Kendrick, #SZA, #Drake, #culture shift, #hip-hop alive at Kendrick Lamar, @Shaw, @Champagne Papa by Bin. Every tour, every drop, every headline in hip-hop is a web of spreadsheets, contracts, and projections. Labels don't just ride waves, they build dams and reroute rivers to keep money flowing the right way. For a decade, Drake was the dam, the river, and the ocean. If you wanted a hit, you either lined up behind him or you released on a weekend. He wasn't touching, but now, in a span of 48 hours, the water started ignoring the old channels. It wasn't rebellion, it was physics. The Kendrick plus SZA show wasn't just a show, it was a shift in demand. And demand is the one thing no label can negotiate with. Emails flew like emergency flares. A senior VP at a major label wrote, "We need a new temperature read. The kids are chasing SZA and Kendrick right now. We have to stop forcing pipeline projects. Find me the moment, not the model." Managers whispered in green rooms, "Keep your drops flexible." The wave just changed direction. Streaming platforms saw the spike in old Kendrick albums and panicked. Algorithms that had been tuned to feed the Drake machine started surfacing jazz-inflected deep cuts from To Pimp a Butterfly. Playlists that were built like OVO satellite stations suddenly found Kendrick and SZA material sticking at the top spots for days without paid placement. Even festival programmers, the people who normally play it safe with predictable headliners, started shuffling decks. One internal memo leaked. If Lamar and SZA can co-headline, no other package matters. We need to rewrite the grid before summer. Sponsors and brands, the quiet giants, noticed too. For years, Drake was a safe handshake. Global, likable, low risk. Now some of those same brands were asking their agencies, who has the culture now? Who's writing the next 2 years of mood, not just the next single? And the most telling sign wasn't panic, it was hesitation. Big machines hate indecision. But in boardrooms from LA to London, there was a new kind of pause. The kind that says, if we keep betting on the old center while the ground moves, We could be pouring millions into nostalgia while the kids build the future somewhere else radio. The dinosaur everyone pretends is dead until it spikes a single felt it too. Program directors started asking for more Lamar catalog tracks, just to see what happens. Overnight testing, those weird call-in focus groups that still steer millions of ad dollars, showed a shocking thing. People weren't tired of Drake. They weren't excited either. And in entertainment, not excited is a quiet death sentence. Meanwhile, Drake's camp kept its poker face. No tweets. No reactive leaks. Not even a subtle guest verse to remind everyone he's still the algorithm's favorite child. Silence, which in Drakeland isn't normal. Usually he runs toward the heat, flips narratives, turns opponents into features, tension into sales. But you can't flip what isn't aimed at you. You can't parody reverence. You can't feature yourself on a cultural shift. That's what made executives sweat the most. The realization that this wasn't a moment you could buy, spin, or schedule. It was a cultural correction. Like gravity had quietly adjusted and all the old math suddenly stopped working. Somebody from a mid-tier label put it bluntly on a call that leaked online. We built the last 5 years on a single assumption that Drake is the sun. Every strategy is a planet. The sun moves, every orbit breaks. This isn't a diss track problem. This is astrophysics. Not every label panicked. Some smiled, some heard opportunity. It's because a crack in an empire isn't just a warning. It's a gap you can slip through. Indie rappers, underground producers, even veteran MCs started pushing out content, hoping to ride the new gravity. If the kids are chasing art again, one veteran said on IG Live, "Let's give them art, not just numbers." In Atlanta, the local press interviewed people who were at the show. Over and over, fans said the same thing. It felt like music mattered again. Not marketing, not gossip, not the next TikTok hook. Music. That's the dangerous part for a machine that runs on predictability. Once people taste soul again, they start asking why they ever settled for product. And all the while, Kendrick and SZA said nothing. They didn't break the fourth wall. No cryptic stories, no studio selfies. It's just silence, which in the middle of a cultural fire sounds like confidence. For execs, that's the sweat that won't dry. Because you can't negotiate with someone who isn't asking for anything. You can't outspend a wave that doesn't need a budget. You can't schedule a moment like this back into safe quarterly boxes. Drake's empire didn't collapse. The charts didn't flip upside down overnight. The world didn't stop streaming Scorpion. But in back channels, in DMs, in the private conversations where the real culture chess is played, you could feel the mood harden into something like awe, something like fear. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing control. Because when the center moves quietly, you don't even hear the walls crack. You just wake up one morning and realize the building you're standing in isn't the tallest in the city. Anymore. #Kendrick, #SZA number, Drake, #industry shift, #cultural physics at Kendrick Lamar, at Shaw, at Champagnopaprix in empires are rarely explosions. They're whispers that become patterns, then patterns that become consensus. By the time the first headline calls it out, the real story's already halfway done. In this case, the whisper isn't Drake fell. He didn't. It's subtler, stranger, more dangerous. Maybe we don't need him at the center anymore. The question burning quietly through studios, boardrooms, group chats, and late-night after-parties. Not hate, not rebellion. Curiosity. And curiosity is deadly to a king, because kings survive on faith, on the belief that whatever comes next won't be better than what already reigns. But what Kendrick and SZA delivered in Atlanta wasn't just a show, it was proof of concept. It was evidence that a throne can exist without a king, that a center can move without a fight, that culture can pivot not through drama, but through desire. Inside labels, you can feel the split forming. Half the room says this is a spike, it'll flatten. We've seen hype cycles before. The other half says, this isn't hype, this is alignment. This is what happens when art gets ahead of the algorithm. One exec leaked a memo. The most dangerous moment in a business cycle is when belief decouples from data. All our metrics still favor Drake, but the room isn't talking about him anymore. If you ignore that long enough, by the time the data catches up, it's too late. For Drake, the chessboard is tricky. A diss track won't solve it. A feature won't fix it. Even a surprise drop risks looking like panic instead of power. And Drake has always played power like a symphony, never rushed, always in control. So what's left? Reinvention. It's the kind that risks comfort, risks image, risks the safe numbers. It's the kind that rips out what worked and bets on what might. But that's a dangerous road even for a king, because the first rule of reinvention is you can't control how it's received, and then there's the other path, patience. Sit still, let the wave burn itself out. Trust that hype decays faster than loyalty. But patience is expensive in a culture that moves in seconds and forgets in minutes. The longer the silence, the louder the shift feels. Meanwhile, Kendrick and SZA keep moving like none of this is about Drake, which is exactly why it's about Drake. They're not fighting for the throne. They're building a different house entirely on a different hill with no crown in sight. And the people who climb that hill aren't leaving notes. They're leaving roots. Fans feel it. Not as war, but as awakening. Old playlists feel stale. New ones feel like treasure maps. People are rediscovering why they fell in love with this genre in the first place. Not because it was safe, but because it was alive. And once a genre tastes alive again, every safe bet feels like background noise. Journalists are catching up now. Think pieces are rolling out. The post-Drake landscape. When the scene outgrows its star, hip-hop without a center. Not all of them are accurate. Most are reactionary. But together, they tell a story. A dynasty is being measured, not mourned. The question in the air isn't if the empire falls. It's what happens if it doesn't. Because sometimes, the worst thing for a culture isn't a king losing power, it's a king keeping it too long. And that's the tension humming underneath every scroll. Every playlist update, every whispered call. Do we stay orbiting what we know, or do we follow where the gravity is pulling us now? No one knows yet. Maybe Drake drops the record of his life next week and the whole world forgets the shift. Maybe Kendrick and SZA turn a spark into a firestorm that permanently rewires hip-hop's center of mass. Maybe both happen, and we watch a genre split into two powerful suns, each with their own orbit. But here's what everyone from fans in the pit to CEOs in glass towers quietly understands now. The center is no longer guaranteed. Drake's empire didn't break, but it cracked. And in those cracks, you can see the future glowing, unpredictable, unstable, unstoppable. And in hip-hop, that's not a threat. That's a promise. #Kendrick, #SZA, #Drake. #Drake, #hip-hop. Future #culture shift. At Kendrick Lamar, at SZA, at @champegmicpop. Was never supposed to be a monarchy. It was supposed to be a movement. Restless, alive, always chasing the next beat of its own heart. What happened in Atlanta wasn't a coup. It was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how powerful the machine, the music still belongs to the people, to the artists who risk, to the fans who feel, to the moments that happen once and change everything after. This isn't about tearing Drake down. It's about lifting the ceiling back up. It's about asking, if the center can move, what could it move to next? That's where you come in. Stream it, share it, talk about it. Don't wait for the charts to tell you what's hot. Make them follow you, because for the first time in a long time, hup, feels alive again. And that's the kind of history you don't just watch, you build. #next era #hip-hop alive #culture shift. At Kendrick Lamar, at SZA, at @champegmicpop.